And then there are 60% who are learned leaders. And learned leaders can lead, they can lead well. But they got to think about it. They got to focus on it. They have to grow in it and be intentional about it. And then there are 20% on the other side that Dan Ryland called natural leaders, and these people just lead easily. They got magnetic personalities. They got a lot of charisma, and even have vision. But that's a small percentage of even this group. If we were to carve out, if we were all leaders here today, we'd carve out a smaller section of the group who are probably natural leaders. And then, of course, that 1%, that was just his way of saying very, very, very few leaders are born leaders. And born leaders are leaders who can't not lead. But at the same time, they don't need to lead. It's not like, it's just their identity. And they were born with that gift. And many of the leaders that we love, and we follow their podcasts, and we read their stuff, all of us, are probably in that 1%. And it doesn't matter, it just seems like whenever they open their mouths, there are nuggets of leadership wisdom to glean. And yet, they're very few. And I guess the point is, even though we wish we were all those men and women, we're not, okay? So we just got to get used to the fact that most of us are just learned leaders. And there's nothing at all wrong with that, and we have to just admit it and just say, Lord, I don't know what my range is. I don't know if on the leadership scale I'm a 5 or a 6 or a 7 or an 8, but if you created me to be an 8, I don't want to be satisfied with a 6. I want to become the best leader I can possibly become. And creating that vibe in our hearts and our attitudes and even a culture in a church is what these 4 steps today are things to at least consider.
Yeah, so you see the premise there that we have, that a leadership culture, and that's what we're talking about. So how do you build a leadership culture within your church? And we believe that's made, not born. And so we have some fill-ins for you. And the first one starts with an M. This is like Mad Libs. It's a noun. Give me a noun.
Yeah, okay. Let's make it simple.
Yeah, okay.
Let's just put in the word, make yourself available, whether you are leading up or down, whether you are being supervised or you're a supervisor. There has to be availability to other leaders in order to learn how to be a better leader. That's what the word is.
Yeah. So from your perspective, then, I feel so short. I don't know.
Yeah, you are. You're not on your platform.
I know that works so well. Now I'm like looking up at both of you guys. Like,
I like it.
yeah, that's fine.
Jackson likes it.
Yeah.
Okay, the thing I want to say about this seminar, and we said it at the beginning of the last one, this will be very brief.
Yeah.
We didn't want to do this.
Yes.
We really felt kind of awkward in accepting this responsibility because what are we doing that makes this a valuable time for people like you to sit and listen here? So Doug Mai, one of the TM team members, was in the last session, and I was smiling at him when I said it because he and I volleyed some emails back and forth. We tried to back out of this. We just felt like there were much more capable people to talk about leadership development.
And that went well.
But that did not go well.
Now we're here. Now we're here.
He told me, you're not getting flowers, bro, if you don't come to it. And so I said, anything. Right? So, and we eventually succumbed to his leadership as one of our denominational leaders and said, okay, well then maybe the Lord wants us to be involved. But then we sat down and we said, but what do we say? And anyway, so because I was really frustrated thinking that anybody would consider me to be any kind of expert at this level.
Yeah, it was an interesting conversation because from Tom's perspective, he's like, I don't need to do anything. We're like, no, you do all kinds of stuff. Like, so we start rattling off things that we feel like we watch and we benefit from. And as we go, he's like, oh yeah.
Okay, well,
yeah, okay,
whatever.
Yeah, okay, great. I'll write it down and I'll make it fancy, which you did.
Yeah.
And so for you then, coming back into HTC, young guy, how do you see that make yourself available play out?
Yeah, I think that I'm even kind of fresh on having made the decision to come to HTC and that whole process, and that was a very prayerful and strategic process, having left one church, going to another. My wife and I had been given great advice to kind of make a list of things that we were looking for in that role, in that church, because we were hoping that this was going to be a church that we were going to be at for a really long time. And so we put together just a kind of, it was a shorter list. It was about 8 bullet points of some things that we were just really looking for in that role and praying for. And one of those things was to have leadership that would make themselves available. That was like, I think if you fall in that seat of being a senior leader, that's a huge draw to a young leader, to know that you are going to make yourself available to them. Because, man, I feel like, I said this last hour, but I feel like Bambi in leadership right now. Like I'm figuring out my legs and they're just super wobbly, and I'm stumbling over so many things. And I look at these really great leaders that are before me, and I want to learn from them. And I find that to be just essential for wherever God's going to take me moving forward in ministry. And it is mind-boggling to me how many senior leaders are just too busy to make themselves available to their team members. And so that was a really big value to me, to find a place that had a culture that was willing to make themselves available. And I think even as we've been processing really even my relationship with Tom, as I've come back to HDC and been able to get to experience it through being on the team, this is probably more than any of the other 3 points. This one walks 2 streets, kind of 2 ways more than anything else. Because as a young leader, I've realized, man, I need to make myself available too, in my desire to be led, to learn from my senior leaders, to make the effort to reach out and to say, hey man, I'd love to learn from you. Is there a way that we can get lunch? Is there a way we can talk? To elicit that, because I need to make that known that I'm willing and ready to learn as well. And so I think that goes both ways. It was definitely an attractive thing in coming to HDC, but I've realized I think maybe in our ministries we've all had volunteers or people who we felt like maybe took a little bit too much of our time for granted almost, and they were just kind of assumed that we were at their beck and call, and they'd text us and email us all the time. And I'm terrified of being that person with Pastor Tom. I do not want to waste his time or treat it like it's not valuable or important. And so in some ways I defer to really not reaching out, not asking, can we get lunch, can we talk? Because I want to be so respectful of that time, and I don't want to misuse it. And so there's a part of me where I've realized, man, I need to get a little bit better at being assertive and saying, man, I'd love to take some time to get to learn from you, to get to ask you some questions, but then also knowing that his door's always open. That creates just a really great connection and an opportunity for the relationship to become organic over time, because I think it's inherently not organic from the jump, right? It feels a little awkward, a little strained. It's like the boss reality of it makes it sometimes hard for that to be an organic relationship. But I think as senior leader makes themselves available, but then also the continued effort of that person who's a young leader to say, man, I want to keep learning from you, I want to keep growing, I think it begins to get on rails and start to become an organic process.
So, what does that look like then for your
Yeah, I was in youth ministry 7.5 years in a church not too far from Pomona before we came up to the high desert in 1984. And I worked for a senior pastor the entire time, same guy, and he was a wonderful guy, and I would consider him a friend and a mentor. I learned more about what not to do in many respects, if I ever had his role, than learning through his example as to what to do. But then I learned some good things about what to do, because he did have some strengths that were very attractive to me as well. But whenever I would knock on his door, which was closed, he would always welcome me in, but I always had the feeling that I got to keep this short and I got to get to the point, because whatever he's doing in here is a lot more important than anything I got going in my youth ministry. And I'm not saying he meant to communicate that, but that's how I felt. Could have been my own insecurity, I don't know. But I determined that if I'm ever in a role like him, my door would not be open. We use that almost as a statement saying, you can come talk to me anytime. No, my door is actually wide open all the time. And as people come cruising down the hall to talk to me, Cheryl, my wife, will ask me in the morning when we're praying together, and we're done praying, she says, so what do you got going today? And I'll say, well, I got a meeting with this guy and that guy. And then I have, 25 other meetings, other 20-minute meetings that I don't even know about yet, because invariably people will stop by and they will say, you got 5 minutes? Like, anybody ever wants 5 minutes? It's never possible. It's always at least 20, but it's okay. Because whatever I'm doing is important, or I shouldn't be doing it, but it's not that important. And I'm a very important person at HTC. I am. But I'm not that important. And these people have every right to expect that I would be available to them whenever humanly possible. And I went into both these guys, you a year before Jackson, but I remember when Jackson came, and of course we knew the Arnett family so well, that I made a point, because I love these kids. I made a point and I said, listen, if you ever want to go to lunch, if you ever want to talk, just ask me. I will never say no, ever. And yet, like Jackson said, on the other side, they want to be respectful and not, go to the well too often, or maybe burn their bridge or whatever, which from my side is not humanly possible to do. We will always get it on the schedule and we'll always make it happen. And I just think that's a responsibility for all of us to be available to each other. Leading a church is a team sport. And you don't have team ministry just because you have multiple staff members. You have a team ministry when everybody on the team wants to elevate everybody else. And that does start with me, if I'm the senior pastor. And man, it's a little intimidating because you're going to be in my seat, Todd. I'll be careful what I say, because I'm going to have to, submit to my brother here in 6 weeks' time. That won't be hard. I love you, man. It's going to be fun.
And I'll say that trickles down through our church. Like, my door's open. Our executive pastor, George, was in the back in the first session, and he's my direct report. His door is always open, and so that is a rhythm for us. And I've served in a much smaller context where I had to make an appointment with the church secretary, administrative assistant of my pastor to be able to get on his schedule so that we could have lunch. And man, I would just say, if you are in a senior role, please don't do that to your staff. Like, don't hide behind a paywall, to get in. Like, because usually, if I'm coming to talk to Tom about something or to George, it's pertinent. It's not something that, man, by the time I get on your schedule, well, it's too late. Like, it's come, that moment has passed. And so I think just that being open, having that opportunity. And I think you still have to convince people that you mean it.
Yes.
Because there's probably, we have a pretty large staff, but I would imagine that, and I don't know, I've never asked you this, but probably very few people, percentage-wise, take advantage of that.
Very few.
Yeah.
Now, many take advantage of the 15-minute conversations.
Yeah.
But if I were to, like Jackson, and you guys have taken advantage of this, we've had several lunches together, oftentimes through COVID. They'd go out, I'd buy, I think I bought it. Yeah, you guys owe me a lot of lunches. But I'd buy, but they'd go pick it up or whatever, sit in my office and talk for an hour over lunch. But I love those times. And, in an hour, we might talk about your issue for 10 minutes. But then we're talking about Tennessee football.
Yeah.
And we're talking about family. And I don't like Tennessee football, but he does. And we're talking about...
Some days.
We're talking about all kinds of stuff. And is our leadership development plan, I guess that's a plan. Just always be available. Because we don't have very often, okay, today, team, I'm going to teach you this leadership principle. It's like, I don't even know what I'd say.
And I'll also say, just from the young leader perspective, for senior leaders, I can tell you with confidence, by the time I come to your door, my wife and I have had like 6 conversations over the last 2 weeks about me mustering up the courage to actually just come to your door and say something and say, hey, because I just feel so insecure about everything. And so that action of like, hey, could we go get lunch? Or hey, could I just talk to you for a couple of minutes? That's been, especially through a young leader, that's been thought about. There's been a lot of build-up maybe for the last month, even just to that initial conversation, which doesn't mean that there's pressure to have that conversation right then and there, but to also know, man, there's been a lot of anxiety ahead of time before that.
You see them pacing back and forth.
Yeah, exactly. There's a reason.
There's something going on.
It's
I
not
just
because
wanna
they
say-
need stuff.
Before we go to point 2, I just want to say one other thing about making yourself available. Just respond to people, especially your team, when they text you or when they email you. And in my world, we call that big leaguing somebody. Like they text you and you don't hear anything from them for a long time. And sometimes I forget. In fact, even in the last hour, Doug Mize in here, and I was thinking I had to apologize to him because I meant to get right back to him and I forgot. That's totally fair. But when I'll text or email my friends in ministry, and I don't hear back from them for like weeks, and what they are saying to me, now whether they mean to or not, I'm not their judge. I'm telling you what I'm hearing them say is, Tom, I love you, but not that much. You're important, but you're not that important. And also always try to get back. That's part of making yourself available. Even with a quick response like, hey, I don't have time now, but tomorrow let's touch base at, come by at 8 o'clock or whatever. Or let's get a phone appointment or something. I mean, even if you need to make an appointment to you, even if you, oh no, it is you. Make an appointment with your senior pastor. I'm not even saying that's always wrong.
Right.
I'm just saying make it happen.
Yep.
And don't string this out like forever as if their time's less valuable than ours, because it's not. Everybody's busy. You're as busy as me, I'm as busy as you. And when everybody says, hey, I know you're busy, dude, I know you're busy. We're just doing different things. Nobody's sitting at home waiting for the phone to ring so they can do something. Not that I ever run into anyone. We're all just busy. We've got things to do. And every time somebody needs you, it is an interruption in your already important agenda for life. But that's ministry. You're making time for the interruptions.
Youth pastors do this intuitively, if you're smart. You just invite them in to your life. So if I have leaves that need to be raked or a fence that needs to be painted, they're going to come with me to Home Depot. They're going to come back to my house. I'm going to buy them a pizza while they rake my leaves and paint my fence.
There you go.
And I'm making myself available for them. And this is a great example today. Tom was coming to the conference. Jackson was coming to the conference. Tom drove Jackson down, and so they were riding down together, making himself available. That's a 2-hour car ride of just conversation, learning, and question. I mean, it didn't add anything extra.
We were talking about you, actually.
Yeah, the whole time. Tennessee football is what you're talking about. Yeah. So,
I'm teasing.
I think you don't. I want you to hear that you don't. We're not saying add extra. We're saying
That's a good
invite
point.
them in.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Bring them along. And I mean, I can think early on in my ministry, my pastor growing up was an amazing pastor. He wasn't a great preacher. He was an average preacher. He was an amazing pastor. And if he was making a hospital visit, he brought me with him. If he was, just moments like that, it's easy. I get the car ride. I get to watch him model ministry for me. I mean, those are learning. You're developing leaders just by making yourself available. Doing something, in many cases, you're already doing. You're just not doing it alone. So, cool. Okay, make yourself available. Questions on that? Comments, concerns, updates in your daily life? All right. A is affirm privately and publicly. What does that mean?
It means to affirm privately and publicly.
Great.
Any questions? These guys do such a great job. I could cry thinking about how I feel, how proud I am of them. And, there's no harm in letting them know that. And not only do I tell them they are doing a wonderful job, but I tell other people they're doing a wonderful job. And I do that because I mean it, but I know strategically that those other people are sometimes, not always, going to circle back and say, Tom said you did a good job. That gives them the sense that I've gone public with this, and it's not just lip service, because I really believe they did a good job. And they do great work.
Yeah, and that
Thanks for
plays up, in a lot of ways it does. How, from your perspective, what does that look like?
Yeah, I'll say for me, in the church context I was coming to HDC, and having the background that I did with HDC, this was far and away the most attractive thing about the church culture that Tom has developed over the
You
years.
said that about the last point.
No,
You said it was. You
I
made
said
a
it
list.
was on
This
my
was the
list.
top.
I said it was on my list. This is like this
He's
was just
kissing
this,
up.
This
That's
wasn't
what
on the
he's
list.
doing.
this wasn't on the list. This was just I was excited about it.
Okay.
It defeats my whole point. No, I was so excited about this aspect of what HTC is all about because I was coming from a church context where, man, every single, I'm a real young leader, I'm fresh out of college, and every single decision that I would make for our youth ministry, our young adults ministry, our fill in the blank, everything that I'm doing, we had a real strong-willed congregation, and they had a lot of opinions about everything. And my senior pastor heard every little thing that everybody had an opinion about that I did. And so I'd pick a book for the youth ministry. We're going to walk through a book. And man, we had families leaving the church over the book that I picked. And they'd go to him and they'd talk about, man, Jackson just picked this book. And it's like, did he even think twice about it and all this stuff? And then he'd just bring it to me like, hey, you should know this is what people are saying. Like, why'd you pick the book? Like, why would you? It's clearly frustrating to these people. And just, man, as he would go on, just taking their side every time, man, I just felt so defeated. Like, I couldn't do a single thing right. And I felt just a lack of courage in everything that I did. Like, I didn't feel like I had the ability to make decisions anymore because I was like, do you want to pick all the books for the youth ministry? Like, I don't know what I should do next time differently. Because I felt just so like, I don't know where to go from here. And so I didn't feel like I had the ability to just like step out in confidence and begin to make decisions and learn how to lead. And what I can say with absolute confidence about the culture at HDC and about Tom and every one of our senior leaders is that if I did anything, whether it was actually true and grounded and it was a dumb decision that I made, or it wasn't at all, and somebody had an opinion about it and they went and they asked Tom or one of our senior leaders, like, what's up with Jackson? He's just the worst. Tom wouldn't buy into that for a second. He'd say, man, we hired Jackson, we believe in him, and he'd have my back to those people. And then Tom would come and talk to me about it. And
Why were you an idiot?
Yeah, why were you an idiot? People are saying you're an idiot. But he would never buy into it and just give them the like, yeah, man, I don't know what we did in hiring Jackson. He would never give them that like impression. He would always have my back publicly with those people. And if there was something to be dealt with, if I had made a bad decision, it'd circle back, we'd talk about it. But more often than not, these are people just being ticky-tacky that my senior pastor was bringing to me. And I just felt so defeated in every way, shape, and form. But at HDC, this continued public affirmation, this continued public having my back, it gives me the confidence to really stumble boldly, to trip and to fall boldly, and be okay with the fact that like I'm going to make mistakes along the way, and they're still going to have my back. And so that's where the public affirmation just gives a lot of confidence to my learning and development as a leader. And then it's the private affirmation that really, I think, solidifies the relationship, because the fact that there really hasn't been a time that I've preached at HDC so far that I haven't received a text or a conversation or an email from Pastor Tom or our other executive pastors on literally every single thing that I've done, where they'd say, man, that was a great job, just so proud of you. And they would just go out of their way when I'm up in front of the church, I'm feeling a little vulnerable maybe about how my message is coming across. They go out of their way to just come back, circle back to me and talk about what went well, what they felt like landed, and bring that just kind of private affirmation as well. Man, now I think all the cylinders are firing. I feel really confident at HDC. I feel really safe and secure. I feel confident to begin to dream about what it would look like to start taking steps of leadership at HDC, knowing that they're going to have my back, and also the confidence that's come from the private affirmation as well. So you put the public and private affirmation together, and now you have really emboldened a young leader.
Yeah, and I think we celebrate well. So not even just young leaders, but our all staff meetings are on Wednesdays, and it's rare that there's not a Wednesday where we're not affirming something that someone did or a ministry has done really well in kind of that space, or even from the pulpit, even like just championing our teams or our staff or in little ways, you know, if I'm the one introducing Tom that day, you know, even just Tom coming and taking the stage, man, thank you. Aren't you grateful for Pastor Jody and how he leads our students? Like, he doesn't even, it just happens. He just says it almost as a transition out of me to the message. But, you know, those types of moments are really affirming in small ways, and they add up. And it doesn't, again, just like the first one, doesn't really take much. It just takes some purpose and some intentionality to that. Anything else?
Probably many things.
Well, and I do feel like this is yet another area where there's a two-way street here as well,
yeah,
right?
we should affirm up.
Yeah, because I think there's something really beautiful about affirming your senior pastor in the way that they lead in, even when Pastor Tom or any of our senior leaders will reach out to me and encourage me on a message, I'll even respond back to them and say, man, that actually was encouraging to me. That meant a lot to me. And I feel encouraged, I feel affirmed, and I'll reach out and say what that meant to me or what their leadership has meant to me. And man, even when Pastor Tom is preaching and something lands really well, to go out of my way to make sure that I mention that. I think all too often in young leadership, you know, young leaders in some ways have a bad rap for thinking that everything is just owed to them. But on some fronts, maybe we do think everything is owed to us. And in the church world, as young leaders, we really need to reclaim a culture of honor for our senior leaders. That we would value their time, their effort, their energy, and the way that we talk about them. That's a huge deal, not just to their face, but to our fellow staff members, because they're always under scrutiny for literally any and every leadership decision that they make, the direction of the church or whatever. There's always a conversation about they might not know what they're doing. And man, for us,
We might not.
for us as young leaders, though, to hold tightly to a culture of honor for our senior leaders, to say, man, I'm gonna honor them with my words behind their back, in front of them. I'm gonna encourage, what their leadership has meant to me, what even a message on the weekend meant to me. I think that those things go a long way because over time, you can end up starting to become maybe more encouraged by the congregation than your senior pastor just because you're a change of pace. And then people just begin to forget about the senior pastor because they're the consistent.
Well, I think as a senior pastor, and if you're a team member on a staff, when you affirm your senior pastor, that's much more powerful than when some member of the congregation does. Because I had to come to grips many years ago. In fact, we had these conversations, I think, Todd, even when you were with us in the last season, and Jackson was just a kid. I had to come to the realization that I am not a pastor to my staff. And I am in some ways because we're shepherding them and loving them, but they are listening to the greatest communicators and the greatest leaders in the world all the time. That's what we do for a living. We follow their We follow their podcasts, we read their stuff. We're listening to their messages online. And then on the weekend, they come and they hear Pastor Tom is like, well, he's my pastor, but I know that I am not the primary. I'm not the one God uses to invest the Word of God into their lives in a primary way like the congregation probably. Pastor Tom is their main source of spiritual food and nourishment. That's not true for a church staff member because you are always getting input from these amazing voices. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. What I'm saying is that it is harder to impress a staff member with your performance as a senior pastor than it is to impress a parishioner. So that when I get words of affirmation, and forgive me, I'm not trying to criticize anybody, it is seldom from a team member. Because I get it. And I'm not that guy that I'm worried about. I am not really worried about that. But it means so much. And if you're a staff associate at your church, you just keep pumping up your senior pastor. That's worth 1,000, hey pastor, good sermon emails from parishioners during the week. I'm just saying. So it does go both ways.
Yeah. And I think young leaders can sometimes just only be looking for leadership opportunities when a lot of being a young leader is looking for encouragement opportunities. Like a young leader should be the most encouraging person on your church staff. They should be looking for opportunities to encourage everybody else in what they're doing and affirm them in how much they're learning from all the other members of their staff. Because that's that's living in your lane as a young leader, to take that on and say, I'm a learner right now, and I'm here to encourage and affirm the people around me. That's a totally different approach than like, why don't I get those opportunities? That changes the way that you look at being on a church staff.
Right.
Which brings us to D.
Defer.
Defer.
Who made this out loud? Defer significant responsibilities.
How does that play out? I learned my lesson. See, that changed the
It
question.
means to defer
Yeah,
significant. There are a lot of things we enjoy doing in leadership, and there are things we don't like doing in leadership. And one of the roles that all of us have is to play to your strengths and defer your weaknesses. I mean, that's, you learn that the body of Christ is multi-gifted, and that if I'm not really good at something, it's best for the body of Christ to find somebody who's really good at that to provide that service for the body. Having said that, there are things that I'm really good at, not many, but there are a few, and I love doing. They happen to be some of the more significant, platformed, spotlighted ministries in the church. And so giving those away is not something that I do because it's better because I suck at those things. It's just really healthy that I defer those responsibilities because it platforms them, it elevates them, and it tells the congregation, hey, these are not just, it's not like Santa Claus and his elves here. These people are gifted people, and they deserve your respect as a church. And they deserve, they at least deserve to be recognized as real pastors. Some of you are student pastors, youth pastors, your church family, many of them don't even think you're a real pastor.
We know that because everyone asks us when we're going to be a real pastor.
But we are very careful,
Yeah.
as you know,
Yeah.
we're very
Oh, yeah.
careful when we talk about people. I don't just say Jody, I say Pastor Jody did a great job explaining that to us last weekend. Because if there's anybody out there that still needs to be informed, this guy has got game as a pastor, and so that's good for them.
Yeah, and that goes back to the affirming. I will tell you, I remember, and this is pre-HCC, but I remember I served at this church. I had just gotten married, had young kids, kind of Bible college town. And it was the second church that I had really been on staff at. And it was a senior pastor who was full-time, and me, who was part-time, which meant we're going to pay you 10 hours a week, but you're going to be here all the time. But the pastor that hired me, we had pastoral transition 2 years in. New pastor comes in. I was really like that. That's my game plan, is get someplace and wait for
New
a new guy
pastor
to
comes.
come in.
Well, you did it again.
Did it again.
Nice
Yeah, hope this one's better than last.
We'll
Just
be.
kidding. It was great last time too. But I remember the new pastor coming in, and the biggest difference that I noticed right away is he always referred to me as Pastor Jody, which no one had done to that point. And I was like 22 years old. I didn't feel like a pastor at all. Like if you had said, "Are you a real pastor?" I'd probably said no. I'm not even close. I don't even know what that would take in my life right now. But that was so affirming, and those opportunities were huge. I asked you this in the last one, and I didn't know, but now I know the answer, but I'm going to ask you anyway for their sake. When was the last time that you baptized somebody in HTC?
Yeah, and this is where it gets awkward because Todd's here. Because I don't want to give anybody the impression this is something a new pastor should do or any other senior pastor should.
Yeah.
But Tom, for whatever reason, the church grew pretty quickly and grew to a large church. I felt like I was getting too much of the spotlight anyway. Because again, we feel so strongly about team ministry. And so I backed out of doing weddings unless I was asked, specifically by a couple who knew me, doing memorial service, unless I've always tried to honor those, even if they don't know me. And I decided I was going to preach half the time instead of most of the time. And in fact, I was talking to Dale Salico, Dale and Elaine, and some of you are too young to remember them, but they were the Willie, before Willie was Dale. He was the last leader of TM. And he was he's a wonderful man. And before TM was TM, we were the American Baptist Churches of the Pacific Southwest. So Dale was the one who led the transition out of the ABC into the formation of what we have now in TM. I love the man, and he's been a great encouragement to me. But before the transition, we're in Providence, Rhode Island at a cheesecake factory. And I always remember the conversations I have at cheesecake factories. And it was Dale and Elaine and my wife Cheryl and I, and Dale said, Tom, what's going on at High Desert Church these days? And I said, I'm planning my exit. This is 20 years ago. And he was surprised. He said, you're leaving High Desert Church? And I said, well, of course. We're all going to leave our church at some point, right? And he said, well, yeah, but... And I said, no, Dale, I'm not leaving soon. But we're in the process of reframing our strategy and our structures to defer significant responsibilities to other leaders on the team. And it wasn't because I didn't love it. It was because it wasn't good for the team, and it wasn't good for the church. We called it a hit by the bus philosophy. I could get hit by a bus tomorrow, and then I'm done. And if all the church knows is Tom, they're like sheep without a shepherd. But when there's this realization among the flock that this is a team thing, and we got multiple shepherds, and we have multiple leaders. And if somebody gets hit by a bus, that's sad, but we're still moving forward. And I think that this whole significant responsibilities is so healthy for a church, because we as senior pastors, and you know this, you get too much of the blame during pandemics and other problems. And when things are going smoothly, we get too much credit. It's like being a head coach of a football team. And head coaches get fired all the time, and it's not even their fault. Because so much is focused on that seat. So much is focused on that role. So I think it's just a good idea to share, and that's what I mean defer, because so much of that is in our purview to make those decisions. And they're better than us in so many ways. I'm looking at two guys. We were talking before the seminar. We probably have 5 guys on our staff that are incredibly competent teachers. And they step up when they get the chance, and these guys are no exceptions to that.
I would just add for our senior pastor folks, don't always make those opportunities like the Sunday after Christmas when you're gone, or the Sunday after Easter when you know it's coming, and certainly not the Sunday after camp so that your youth pastor can give a report.
Have we ever done that?
Not to me.
Okay.
But it's fine to give those opportunities. You know, I think as a young leader, you'll take them. You know, it doesn't matter how many you're used to teaching in team groups of students.
Those are the leftovers.
Those are the leftovers.
Yeah.
The moments that matter to me, and I'll speak for me, is when I'm preaching and my senior pastor's in the room.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's communicating something different. That's not communicating. This is the backup, you know, the QB got hurt, so we're calling in the backup until he gets back. That's communicating, I trust him. And you're sitting on the front row while he's preaching, not because you're watchdogging, but just because you're championing, or you're at least in the room. Those moments are huge for us.
And I just got to say real quick, and I'm sorry if I'm rambling, I think nothing, and I mean this, nothing happens at High Desert Church like I wish it did. Nothing. He doesn't do his job like I do his job. He doesn't do his job like I do his job. I'm not saying I'd do it better, but I would do it different. And the point I'm making is that, but you guys, I don't walk in their office and tell them how to do it my way, because my way is not important. What's important is we got big L leaders here. That means they're very gifted. And if you want to attract good leaders, you got to let them what? You got to let them lead. Because if they can't lead with you, they're going to go somewhere else to lead. And you don't want that, because they're doing a great job, and you know that, but sometimes you just can't frame everything in your image. And every time, I could tell you, I could make a case every time in my own head. If I let myself, I wouldn't do it that way, I'd do it differently. And I've worked with people who actually then would walk into the office and say, listen, I appreciate what you're doing, but this is the way I want you to do it. As a senior leader, I have done that because it's that important. Sometimes you got to use your intuition. But I would say it is have I ever done that with either of you? Very small, and it's not, I'm not trying to say I'm really good at my job. I'm just saying, you got to let these people do their jobs, even if it means it doesn't quite look like you would do it.
Yeah, and that's hard.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the last one, which is expect growth.
Listen, I rolled into High Desert Church 38 years and 2 weeks ago. I'm a better leader now than I was 38 years ago. These guys, a couple of years, 3 years ago, they're better leaders than they were then. We expect growth. We have a philosophy of hiring, and if you like sports, professional teams have drafts, amateur drafts, drafts out of college, whatever. And so a team will either draft by position. For example, as a baseball team, you need a second baseman. You're going to get the best second baseman in the draft. If you have first round choice, you get the best second baseman in the draft. He might be the 15th one listed in terms of ability, but he's a second baseman. Or you draft BPA, best player available. You may not need a QB, but that guy's good. So you're going to draft the best player available, and that's always been our approach. We didn't know this guy when we hired him out of Atlanta a few years ago, but we knew Jackson because he raised him. And we had mad respect for the Arnett family across the board. We knew Jackson, but I remember the conversations. George was in the back of the last session, our XP, and he was nodding and smiling because the discussions that George and I had, we didn't even need this role. In fact, we said, what are we going to hire Jackson to do? I said, I don't care. Just get Jackson. Because he's got that much potential as a young leader to become a significant player in the body of Christ at some point. And we just wanted to have him on our team. And so that's what we do. If we see a great opportunity to pick up a great leader, we'll find a place for them to lead. Even if that means I'm going to defer more significant responsibilities to appropriate a place on the bus for that man or that woman because they're that good. And that has served us so well over the last 38 years. And one of the reasons why HTC has been able to continue with a pretty good cadence of growth and mission and dynamic for so long.
So for you,
By the way, I expect you guys both to grow up. I expect growth.
I'd like to grow some hair, but it's not happening. Expecting growth for
Yeah.
you, what does that look like?
Yeah, I think on the young leader side, we can, I think of one of the theme verses for being a young leader is 1 Timothy 4:12, right? Don't let anybody despise you for your youth. It captures our angst perfectly. Nobody despised me for my youth. But we chop the verse in half. The rest of the verse says, but set the example in word and conduct and speech and faith and love. That's how you don't let anybody despise you for your youth, is set the example. That's the model that Paul gives to Timothy there. And I think all too often we can just kind of let being young and hip and trendy be enough. And we be these really shallow leaders that don't pursue our own growth. And that is not enough to have longevity in ministry. And so we need to pursue our own growth. It's great if our senior leaders expect it of us. We should expect it of ourselves. And our senior leaders can't chase our growth for us. They can't facilitate our growth for us. That has to be something that we own and we run after. And I think that's a huge part to being a contributor as a young leader on a team. But I think all too often we just kind of expect things to fall in our lap, or we expect things to go a certain way. When we just need to get in the trenches and start growing in our own faith, growing in our discipleship, in following Jesus, growing in our leadership. I think we have to have a growth mindset when we approach leadership as a young leader, and really be looking for ways that we can not just be average, not just be okay, but we can set the example. like, I'll tell you what, on this note of deferring and expecting to grow, like when Pastor Tom gives me an opportunity to preach to the congregation at HTC on a stage and a platform that he has developed and built over 38 years with that group of people, I don't say like, yeah, I can like squeeze it in and like I'll put a little bit of work into it and I'll get up there and like I'm young and I'll be different and kind of a pace change. Like that's got to be, I'm putting every effort I can to make that the best message that I've given in my life so far, because I want to give it full effort and full work in all that I do in those opportunities that are given to me. I'm not expecting me being young or novelty to be enough to merit those opportunities, but really to pursue continued growth and to give my best. That's how we don't let anybody despise us for our youth, is we don't give them a reason to despise us. We let our angstiness in our youth to push us towards improvement, to push us towards being better, not to as an excuse to be average. And so I think that's a pace change for us. And I love opportunities that Pastor Tom gives me. I love opportunities when I get to sit down and even talk with Pastor Tom and our other senior leaders about what my role on the team might look like this many years from now, or what my career and future in ministry might look like this many years from now, because those things inspire me and encourage me to want to continue to grow and to develop. And even the fact that they could see that is so affirming to me, but it just sparks me again to be like, yeah, I want to grow. I want to keep learning. I want to keep growing. I haven't arrived yet just because people might think I look cool. That's not enough to be a leader. I need to keep growing. So.
Yeah, I think it means you also have to be patient, right? We live in a time and an age, particularly where there's plenty of opportunities to chase, and if you're not careful, you'll chase yourself out of the growth. So like in youth ministry, the example I always give is, man, I talk to youth pastors that'll tell me they have 10 years of youth ministry experience, but they really just have two and a half over and over and over. And the problem is you grow most from year 3 to year 5 in any role you're in. You can do 2 years of anything without Jesus, let's be honest. But year 3, it gets real. And so you've got to be ready to wait. And let that go. You got to be able to. You can do it. To wait. It'll come. Like your season, your time, your moment, it will come. But you're gonna have to grow into it so that when it does come, you're ready. Otherwise, you're gonna outpace. You're gonna find yourself in opportunities that you're not able to handle because you've outpaced the moment. Does that make sense? Yeah. You've outpaced the growth, and then you're gonna fail and find yourself frustrated because you're failing in that spot. When if you had just been patient and leaned in, expecting to grow but waiting to grow, you'd find yourself in a much more stable spot.
You know, my dad was in ministry. These guys know, or knew PF. He's with the Lord now. And his role in the body of Christ was not as settled maybe as the one I felt called to 38 years at High Desert Church. My dad, my sister and I were raised in a church for about 5 years, 6 years, and then we moved to another church. And that was replicated often. And I was telling somebody the other day, said, I had a question. They had a question in their devotions from the Book of Job, and I know the Book of Job because I heard my dad preach that series like 8 times in 8 different churches as I was growing up. And I think the point is, it's like when you go from church to church, even as a senior pastor, you can keep bringing out your best stuff. But when you're in a church as a Bible teacher for 38 years, you got to teach a lot more and maybe a little deeper and about a lot of other things, and you just can't keep going back to your best stuff because these people have already heard it twice or more. So, but I think the point is, you got your growth, man. You just got to grow.
Yeah.
That's like being what did we say? We were talking about marriage coming down.
Yeah.
And the option in marriage is you either grow up or you get divorced. That's the option. Yeah. And that's why God says you're going to grow up when you take a spouse. That's what we're going to do right now. We're going to grow you up. And if you hang in there, it will happen. If you don't want to, nobody grows up until they have to. I didn't. You didn't. But when God puts you in a situation where you got to grow up here, you do, or you bail,
Yeah.
which, to your point,
Yeah.
not a good idea.
So we made it through fill-ins. Any questions, comments, concerns about any of those things? I don't know if we're really good or really bad, but that's,
I can
that's
tell
our
you, I'll give you the answer to that after we're done.
Okay. Last section here, the three phases.
Yes.
Do you want to explain
Well,
that?
I just, if you're dreaming about having a leadership culture at your church, you're already seeing this because we see this even in the last couple seminars. We'll say something and then you see people nod like, yeah, we've realized that to be the case in our world. And there's inconsistency sometimes in all of our lives. We really are dreaming about things, but it's not happening and like we'd like it to. And it won't until you are intentional. Till you actually write it down. One of the quotes I used in the book, Not My Church, that's not an advertisement for it, but if you haven't read it, it's really terrific. And, and Emmett Smith at his Hall of Fame induction ceremony in a speech, he said, it's only a dream until you write it down, then it becomes a goal. And I would say write this stuff down, and not just because our words are magical words, but find what you need to grow in and write it down and get some goals here and be intentional about it. Because truly over time, good or bad, and whether we're the best or even better than some when it comes to developing leaders or developing a leadership culture at our church, we do this without thinking. Even an open door, even a comment of affirmation, even thinking, well, somebody else could do that, and that would be good for them, and it'd be good for the church. Or even, the expectation or asking, how can we kind of have that conversation with our team? Write it down, and then it becomes a goal. Because when it becomes more intuitive, then you don't have to write stuff down. And again, good or bad, I don't write very much down anymore because it's just become a natural, very organic part of who we are. So that's
Just
what that last part
okay.
means.
Last thought from you? Anything? You don't have to.
No, I just think, I think if you're a senior pastor, you're looking to acquire young leaders, right? That can be a kind of hot commodity or a thought of like, man, it'd be great if we got a little bit younger as a church or as a staff. I do think that the things just in the fill-ins right there, those are a lot of the essentials to know that you're going to be able to have an open ear with a senior leader and that you're going to get opportunities that aren't just like B team opportunities. They're not just opportunities that even have no accountability to them, but opportunities really that facilitate growth. That's how you get senior leaders or young leaders. Like it's not really through things as flashy as much as it is through time and through opportunities, because we are chomping at the bit and we want to grow and we want to learn and we want to learn from your example. And so take that with confidence. If you feel like, man, I'm not somebody really to learn from, we do. We want to learn from you and we want to get opportunities and we want to hear what you thought about how we did, because that process, though it might feel a little stiff at first, it only gets more organic over time. And so I think that's really the way that you attract young leaders. It's not through some really kind of cool internship program that you develop and you got this pipeline for people. I think it really just starts with being available and giving them opportunities. So,
And I would say don't feel pressure to feel like the expert, because you're further along, right? And that's all we need, is just somebody who's further down the road. We don't expect you to have it all figured out, but you do know more because you're a little further down the road. And so I think sometimes we feel like, I can't mentor anybody, I can't invest in leaders, I don't know what the heck I'm doing. Well, you know more than you used to, hopefully. And so we'll do that. Any questions about anything?
I can have a question.
Yeah.
So I just quit my full-time job and I'm the youth pastor at my church now. And it's really hard with, not struggling with burnout so much, but there's just nobody that wants to, help in youth ministry anymore. So how do you deal with that? Like, I feel like I have all the responsibilities and there's people that come in and they go, and then you have people that are like, well, I feel like called by God to lead. I hate teenagers, but I guess I'll try this out.
Yeah.
It's like, then you probably
You
shouldn't
said
be
me
there.
too. Yeah, right.
But it's like, it's a struggle struggle to find the people, and I know I pray about it a lot, and I know that's like, the answer is prayer, but how do you deal with that with, I don't know if you guys do deal with that. I'm from Montana, so we don't have like
Montana?
scope of.
Where at in Montana?
Kalispell, Montana.
Oh, that
So-
explains it.
Yeah.
Where, what, do we have, forgive me,
No, go.
Transformation Ministries? It's a TM
Purpose
church?
Church. Yeah, so Purpose Church.
Purpose
Pomona.
Church's
Mhm,
campus.
And Kalispell, yeah. Yep, and so we're going through a huge transition right now, and it's just hard to navigate the waters. I know it's a lot of just like,
Yeah.
I'm blind. I feel like Paul right now. It's like, I don't know what's going to happen next, and I trust God 100%, but
Sure.
it's hard to be encouraged and to know like what the future holds with no help really in things.
I would make a suggestion. I was a youth pastor, not in Montana.
That would've been nice.
It's tough. the
Yeah,
roads.
but I mean, that sounds very cool.
And you should come to the desert. I think Montana's probably, I
Yeah.
could probably get a youth pastor to come to Montana. I don't know if I
We're
could.
not helping her right
No
now.
one wants to come.
I would say, honestly, because I kind of had this experience.
Yeah.
I was volunteer poor, but I had enough kids that needed help, and I just sat them down and said, we're going to have to lead each other.
Mhm.
And I need you guys in the youth group to step up
Yeah,
and be the leaders.
yeah, and we've started doing that for sure.
And I, putting them, and it's good for them, because at some point they need to anyway.
Yeah.
But we had, you got a youth group of, 50 kids, and 10 of them are in the special leadership small group, for your youth group. Man, we had a youth group of 10 kids, they were all in the special, they didn't even want to be, but they were all in that
That's how
special
it is
group.
in our church,
And
yeah.
we're reading books about leadership,
Mhm.
we're reading books about mentoring,
Mhm.
we're making them, because honest, what's your name?
Chelsea.
Chelsea, honestly, God is faithful, you've been praying.
Mhm.
So you got a vision in your heart to accomplish something great, and you're trying, and it's not working out. There's another lane he wants to shift you in, and I don't know why,
Yeah.
but there's some gems in that youth group
Yeah.
that are going to benefit from no adult leadership,
Yeah.
except you. You are an adult, is that true? Chelsea, you're
Some days.
a good girl.
Yeah. I would just say too, especially when you're stepping into a new spot like that, it just takes time to build a culture. Particularly in youth ministry, you're going to have to build a culture of volunteers. So when I got to HTC 3 years ago, the campus that I stepped onto had been through quite a bit of transition. It was pretty unstable, and we were scrambling to find leaders. And I remember sitting down with our junior high pastor, and we had a couple staff there, and telling them, like, listen, 3 years from now, we're going to have more volunteers than we need, but we're going to have to stay the course right now. And they didn't believe me, but this is 3 years in, and we're literally making up jobs for volunteers right now, like, because we don't know what to do. And how that happens is you've got to be able to clearly define where you're headed. So similar question was asked earlier, and even in our youth pastor lunch thing. What I would say is, you need to be able to say, 5 years from now, this is where we want to be. And it doesn't have to be numbers, right? But this is where we're going to be. Then 3 years from now, this is where I need to be in order to be there at 5. And a year from now, this is where I need to be. Then where do I need to be at 6 months? And then every time you get in front of parents or the church, you're selling that vision. Because you're not selling them. You've got two options when it comes to volunteers. And we tend to do it, we tend to plug holes so the ship doesn't sink. And those volunteers will be with you for a short season, but they will always leave because they're there to fill a need.
Yeah.
And what I tell people is, instead of plugging holes, raise the sails. So you want people that are going to come along and they know where you're headed, and they're going to join in with what is doing. And so sometimes that's even in how you ask. Like if I was asking Jackson to volunteer with me, I wouldn't say, man, we really need volunteers.
Put a guilt trip on
Our
it.
kids are going crazy. If we don't get another volunteer, I don't know how we're going to pull this off. Like,
Yeah.
no one wants to volunteer to that. It's terrifying.
Mhm.
But if I say to Jackson, man, I really feel like God's doing something in our students. Like I can see it. God is, man, there's an undercurrent of Him moving in the lives of our students. And I can see down the road where it's headed. man, and I would love for you to come alongside us and be a part of what God is doing. That's a different pitch,
Yeah.
and that's a vision pitch. And you've got to be able to nail that down in your own self, and then just be consistent time over time, and eventually you'll get it. You know, our very first meeting with our volunteers that we had, because I was terrified they were all going to quit, I stood and said, listen, and we went to Judges 2:10, which is not a normal verse you look at in youth ministry, but Judges 2:10, Moses is dead, right? Joshua's assumed, and Judges 2:10 says, and after that rose a generation who did not know the Lord, right? After Joshua. And I said to them, that will not happen on our watch. That's why we are here. Because if we don't stand in the gap for these students, if we don't run toward a generation that everyone else is running from, they will be saying that of us. And we can't allow that to happen. And I want you to stay the course with me and run towards that. And sometimes it's just being able to steer people towards vision. That's really hard when you're looking around, you got nobody, and you're like, I am the vision, you know, like.
Yeah.
But I think people want to be a part of God's movement, not a babysitter. And when people think students specifically, they almost always think chaperone.
Yeah.
And I don't want a chaperone. I need people who are going to mentor, like we're talking about mentoring leaders that will then turn around and those leaders will mentor students into leaders while you're doing, in the meantime, investing in these guys. Like, come on, guys, don't, we can do it.
Yeah.
We can do it. I don't know if that's helpful. We can, and I'd love to talk to you more about that.
Yeah.
Like if that's something that you need help with
Yeah, that's great.
offline. Because those are conversations I have. a lot
Your
of.
senior pastor is Glenn Gunderson.
Yeah.
Just ask him.
Yeah.
He's got all the answers. He's great.
Glenn Gunderson.
He is the best. He's such a nice guy. He's the best.
He's the nicest.
I've said it.
He's the nicest.
First time I met Glenn, I told my wife he's either the biggest phony I've ever met or he's the nicest guy I've ever met. Turns out he's the nicest guy I've ever met. Yeah, he's a good man. I love him.
I would just encourage you, you're not alone in that.
Yeah.
You feel it in youth ministry, but if there were worship folks in here, they'd tell you that. If they were, we feel it,
Yeah.
like, and it's just, every church is feeling that right now, more than ever. And it's hard because for students, and we, for so long, I think student ministry, things trickled through adults to students. We would deal with issues in adults before it hit students. And if it hit high school students, it may never hit junior high. But now everything's flipped. So we're dealing with things in junior high and high school that adults haven't even started processing yet. And so we're not just on the front lines anymore. We're deep in enemy territory, trying to navigate through sexual identity and depression and anxiety and suicide. And like I long for the days of an eating disorder. Like, please, Lord, give me a kid with an eating disorder. Like I can deal with that, right? And so when you're doing that alone, it can be really exhausting. So for you, it's going to be really important to know that 5-year mark, because if you're measuring day by day by day by day, you're gonna quit, and you don't need to quit. So, if you guys want to join youth ministry, you can come serve with us. Chelsea's in Montana. It's beautiful there.
Or Victorville.
Or Victorville.
Yeah.
It's not so beautiful there.
Dennis.
But we do have a Cracker Barrel.